In light of the tension between the police and the public in many cities across the nation, it's crucial that people, especially young people, know and understand their rights. So in this video, I will answer a commonly asked question concerning your legal rights when interacting with the police. Also, stay tuned until the end of the video, where I will provide the Christian perspective. Christian attorney Ariel Johnson, lawfullife.us. If you're new to this channel, my aim is to make the law accessible to real people. So if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe and to click the notification bell so that you will not miss any new content. Now, before tackling the frequently asked questions people have when interacting with the police, it may be instructive to define the three classes of crimes. In America, there are three classes of crime. They are infraction, misdemeanor, and felony. Let's review these in order of severity. Here are the three classes of crimes in the United States. A felony is a grave crime such as a murder or a rape, for which the punishment may be forfeiture of property, imprisonment for more than a year, and or death in 28 states in the U.S. A state's penal or criminal code tells you whether a specific behavior is classified as a felony. Because felonies always include the possibility of imprisonment, a felony defendant is entitled to an attorney, a fair trial, and a trial by jury if demanded. The term misdemeanor comes from the term demeanor, which means behavior towards others, and has come to literally mean bad behavior towards others. Each state's criminal code specifies which outward conduct constitutes a misdemeanor. Common misdemeanors include possession of a controlled substance or a drug without a prescription, minor theft, vandalism, perjury, prostitution, indecent exposure, trespassing, simple assault, resisting arrest, public intoxication, and driving while under the influence. But the key distinction is that a misdemeanor is a crime that is less than a felony. However, like felonies, many misdemeanor charges also carry the possibility of imprisonment, so the right to counsel, a fair trial, and a jury is also attached to misdemeanor offenses. By contrast, an infraction is a rule violation for which the penalty is usually in the form of a fine imposed without the danger of imprisonment. Infractions include things like drinking in public, littering, or jaywalking. As such, while there may be a right to notice of a hearing for an infraction, there is no right to an attorney or a jury for an infraction because there is no threat of jail or imprisonment. So why do these three distinctions even matter? Well, because in many instances, we can't undo the mistakes that we make. By this, I am of course referring to criminal convictions, which can in some, but in not all instances, be expunged. That is, removed completely from the public record. Now, every state places a limit on which crimes are eligible for expungement. As a matter of fact, states place limits on the minimum number of misdemeanors, usually no more than 3, and the minimum number of felonies, usually no more than 1, that a person can have before he or she may ask a court to expunge a criminal record. For instance, a young person who wants to forcefully assert his or her legal rights during a police stop and who firmly believes that he or she occupies the moral high ground is in fact laboring under a false belief if he or she takes matters to the extreme of ignoring law enforcement and simply walking away, pulling away, or running away from a police officer. So the practical problem is, these cases frequently appear in court as assaulting, resisting, or obstructing a police officer, which by the way is a felony. As such, if convicted, a great deal of time and effort will be required to expunge the young person's record, which usually can't be done until after the young person reaches the age of majority. So with this legal peril in mind, let's turn to a commonly asked question concerning your legal rights when interacting with the police. Question number 1. Do police actually have to say you have a right to remain silent, like they say on television, and if so, why? The short answer is no, they do not. The so-called right to remain silent is known as the Miranda warning. The Miranda warning, that is to say, law enforcement's duty to advise you of your constitutional right to remain silent, only comes into play if you're under arrest. That is, in the legal custody of the police and not free to go. Nonetheless, anything you say or do during your encounter with law enforcement could be used against you in court. Also, you are legally required to answer certain questions under certain circumstances. For instance, some states require that you provide your name to law enforcement if you're stopped and told to identify yourself. Thus, as a rule of thumb, law enforcement can ask you your name, address, age, or request to see your identification. But even if you give this information, you're not required to answer any other questions. Additionally, if you're pulled over for a traffic violation, the officer can require you to show your license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. Further, if you're not a U.S. citizen and an immigration officer asks you for your papers, you must show them if you have them with you. Indeed, if you're a non-citizen visa holder who needs to enter the United States, the Border Patrol can deny you entry into the United States if you refuse to answer their questions. If this happens, you will be barred from entering the United States for 5 years. That said, you do have a constitutional right to remain silent and should exercise that right, as well as your right to legal counsel if you're placed under arrest. Now for the Christian perspective. As I mentioned earlier, I worry about the thousands of well-meaning young people being misled onto the path of lawlessness by nefarious forces hell-bent on social upheaval. Most, if not all, of these forces are self-confessed communists who are constitutionally moored to a rejection of God. Make no mistake, there is nothing godly about this so-called revolution we're witnessing in our country. Take, for example, the apostles who did the Lord's work under the tyranny of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Nonetheless, the Apostle Paul instructed us to be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or the governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. That's 1 Peter 2:13 through 17. But undaunted and undoubtedly inspired by the father of lies, these forces use our youth as cover to usher in their long-awaited and cherished communist paradise. Again, my worry is that many well-meaning and justice-minded youth, who by the way have zero actual interest in socialism or communism, will find themselves processed through the criminal justice system and classified as lawbreakers, unsuited for the very future for which they are now struggling. It is a fatally flawed strategy to act on the belief that you can end injustice by doing injustice, or that you can conquer injustice with hate. Indeed, in 1956, Dr. King, who well understood injustice within the American experience, told us that as you press on for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the weapon of love. Let no man put you so low as to hate him. Always avoid violence. If you succumb to the temptation of using violence in your struggle, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and dissolute night of bitterness, and your chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. 7 years later, Dr. King also told us that the chain reaction of evil, hate begetting hate, wars producing more wars, must be broken, or we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. So I personally urge any person who has succumbed to the temptation of using violence in the struggle for social justice to remember that the root of hate is delusion fueled by anger. The root of anger is fear, and fear and faith cannot occupy the same space. As Dr. King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only the light can do that. Thank you for watching. If you find this content useful, please let me know what you think in the comment section, and let me know if you have questions or suggestions for future videos. Also, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss any upcoming content. By the way, if you're looking for legal content that's accessible to real people, be sure to join us online at lawforlife.us, where we profess the truth that without God we can do nothing.